Welcome to NME ICT Sakshat e-content project under Ministry of HRD Government of India. This project is of marketing management. The project is under NME ICT, that is National Mission on Education through Information and Communication Technology. Under this mission, a proper balance between content generation, research in critical areas relating to imparting of education, and connectivity for integrating our knowledge with the advancement in other countries is to be attempted. In order to bolster our knowledge resources to obtain and maintaining the competitive edge in the world, we require a system of identification and nurturing of talent and lifelong learning. Knowledge modules based on personalized needs of the learner would need to be delivered to him or her at the right time with the right content interactively to take care of his or her aspirations. With these objectives in mind, these videos are created for the portal Sakshat. We will learn basic marketing over here.
Hi, I am LL means learner. I am learner of marketing management. I'll learn marketing in master's class. The desire for learning marketing comes out of interest. This is very interesting topic. Marketing management is seen everywhere in the society. You see up or down, you see here and there, you can see brand names and logos and advertisements and people working in marketing area. I am very much interested in learning marketing. Let us learn marketing from Dr. J. Badiani. He is going to teach marketing management under Sakshat e-content development project under National Mission on Education through Information and Communication Technology, that means N-M-E-I-C-T. Let us start learning.
Good morning to all. Today, we are going to learn communication process.
Hello friends. Today we are going to understand what communication is. What are the important qualities of communication? What are the significant components involved in the process of communication? What are the barriers in the process of communication? And what are the types of communication? Now let me share with you this. Good communication is like drinking a black coffee. It is as stimulating as having a black coffee. You cherish it, but once you cherish it, it is very difficult to sleep after having it. Once you listen to an interesting communication, you get so absorbed and involved, it would be very difficult to sleep completely. After that, you just continue cherishing it, thinking over it. There is a famous quote that the way we communicate with others and the way we communicate with ourselves defines the entire quality of human life. It is very true that communication works for those who work at it. It means we have to work at our communication. It means we have to enhance our communication skills. It means we have to improve our communication competence. Remember one thing. If we want to communicate with others effectively, we have to understand that we are all different, and there are different ways to perceive the world, and the way we perceive the world is different. So in this way we have to understand this, and we have to use this understanding as a guide to our communication with others. The process. Now communication is a process. At one end you find one person, at the other end you find another person. Communication is a process of sending information from one end to another, from one person to another. Now, the first party who sends the communication or sends the information or message is sender, and the second party who receives the information is the recipient. Now, it is very important for the recipient to decode the information and try to understand the words, the information, the same way as they were intended by the sender. Now, this process of communication involves both sort of exchanges. It might be verbal exchanges and it might be non-verbal exchanges as well. But the prerequisite of communication is the message. Message is very important. And it is very essential that the message should be understood by the recipient the same way as it was intended by the sender. In this way, communication is a two-way process and it is incomplete without the recipient's feedback. The recipient has to respond back, and that too within a fixed time frame. Then only the process becomes complete, and it is very important or significant that the recipient understands communication, or rather information, or rather message, the same way as it was intended by the sender. Now, let us try to understand different components of the communication process. The first component of communication process is context. Communication is affected by the context in which it takes place. Now, this context might be physical or social or chronological or historical or even cultural. Cultural communication is very important to understand and analyze, because I have the experience of teaching communication in different contexts. For example, the way we understand communication, the way we interpret communication in India is certainly different from the way the communication is interpreted in the Middle Eastern culture. And of course it is different the way it is understood by North American audience. Although the fundamentals of communication are the same anywhere in the world, but then the context is different, the culture is different, customs are different, traditions are different, people are different, and the thought processes are also different. Now, the second component of communication process is the sender or the encoder. Now, who is the sender or the encoder? Sender is a person who sends the message. A sender makes the use of symbols. Now, the symbols might be visual, the symbols might be non-visual, the symbols might be words, the symbols might be graphic or visual or gestures or postures or smiles or body language or even eye expression. And in this way, it is conveyed to produce the required response from the recipient. Now, the sender might be an individual, might be a group, might be an organization, who knows? Now, the views, background, approach, skills, competencies, and knowledge of the sender have a great impact on the message. The verbal and non-verbal symbols are chosen, and they're essential in ascertaining interpretation of the message by the recipient in the same terms as it is intended by the sender. Now, the third component is the message. Message is the key idea that the sender wants to communicate. It is a sign that elicits the response from the recipient. Communication process begins with deciding about the message to be conveyed. It must be ensured that the main objective of the message should be clear. If it is not, then the communication is not productive. It is not meaningful. Now, the fourth component of communication is definitely the medium. What is a medium? Medium is a means which is used to exchange or transmit the message. The sender must choose an appropriate medium for sending the message, or rather transmitting the message. If the message is conveyed through wrong medium, then it is possible that it cannot be conveyed in the desired way or even desired recipients. Now, the choice of appropriate medium of communication is very essential for making the whole process very effective and correct. The message should be correctly interpreted by the recipient, as we know. Now, the choice of communication medium varies depending upon the features of communication. For example, written medium is chosen when the message has to be conveyed to a small group of people, while an oral medium is chosen when spontaneous feedback is required from the recipient. Now, the fifth component in communication is recipient. Recipient is the person who receives the message. The message is intended for the recipient or aimed for the recipient. The degree to which the decoder or the recipient understand the message is dependent upon various factors, such as knowledge of the recipient or their responsiveness to the message. Now, the final and ultimate component of communication process is feedback. Feedback is the main component of communication process, as it permits the sender to analyze the efficacy of the message. It helps the sender in confirming the correct interpretation of message by the recipient. Feedback might be verbal, for example, words. Feedback might be non-verbal, for example, smiles or eye expressions or smiles, or even body language or gestures or postures. And feedback might be summative or feedback might be formative. Formative feedback is given at the end. Formative feedback is given every moment, intermittently, continuously, while summative feedback is given at the end of the whole speech event or might be communication process. Let us retrospect the four common types of communication. Now, we know today that there are several types of communication or ways of communication, but there are four types of most common communication in society. Now, the four types are: 1. Interpersonal, 2. Intrapersonal, 3. Small group communication, and finally 4, and that is public communication. Now, let us understand what is intrapersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is the most private communication. Interpersonal communication is the internal thoughts of the communicator. Within ourselves, we carry out a personal dialogue, our personal emotions, feelings, thoughts, views, and opinions. Inside that personal dialogue, the communicator assumes the roles of both the sender and the recipient. Examples of intrapersonal communication are daydreams, thinking and talking to ourselves, or comprehending a book or an article or a good research. Intrapersonal thinking plays a very important role in the way that we establish concentration and problem-solving skills. Now, the second type is interpersonal communication. Now, interpersonal communication is the communication conducted between generally two people. Now, this one-on-one form of communication is typically an informal exchange of thoughts or ideas or ideals or views or opinions. Both individuals in the conversation act as the receiver and the sender. Both are exchanging and receiving the information that is being revealed. Now, a benefit of this interpersonal communication is the ability to assure that the intended message is being interpreted as expected by the receiver. Also, this type of communication occurs in an informal setting. Now, third type of communication, and that is small group communication. Small group communication is when a small sized of group of people come together to discuss or to solve an issue. Now, the group has to be small. It has to be small enough to allow each member to interact with each other. Unlike the two types of communication mentioned before, communicating can become more complicated and confusing in this communication. How? The confusion is caused by more people introducing information continuously into the conversation. Since the small group is meeting to resolve a specific issue, the content of the conversation tend to be more structured and slightly formal. If we conduct this sort of conversation in a very organized, structured, and formal way, the results would be magnificent. And the communication might be very, very efficient. The last but not the least is public communication. Now, this form of communication, where a sole speaker delivers a message to a large group of people, and that is called public communication. The message is delivered in a very planned and structured and organized way. With the large audience, the speaker is now required to portray their message in an aesthetically and verbally effective way. Visual aids can also be used to ensure that the proper message is displayed or conveyed or communicated by the speaker. Now, a disadvantage to this sort of public communication is that the audience is generally not allowed or not able to give feedback to the speaker. The only two forms of communication between the audience and the speaker takes place in this sort of communication is either the applause or the body language, and the setting is very formal in this sort of communication. Let us consider the important qualities that are inherent in a good communicator. The first quality, which is inherent, which is inborn in a good communicator, is self-awareness. Someone with good communication skills is usually self-aware. This means that he or she is in touch with how he or she come across to others in speech and in action. He or she is probably attuned to the subtleties of his or her own moods and can recognize how others might interpret his or her body language or even tone of voice. He understands that he is not always right and that others see the world and form opinions through their own life experiences. He or she knows his or her own strengths and shortcomings as well. Now, the second quality of a good communicator is objectivity. An effective communicator is able to see an argument or an issue without bringing emotions into it. He or she is able to see things as they are without attaching judgment or bias to them. He or she knows that there are many ways to look at an issue, and definitely he is willing to entertain other people's opinions or ideas fairly and rationally. And that is very important in communication. Now, the third important quality, which is essential, required in a good communicator, is receptiveness. A good communicator is always receptive. He or she is able to listen to the ideas of others and is willing to admit when they are right or when they have valid points. He or she is able to pick the best idea based on what is best for him or her, or even for the whole group, or even for the whole organization. A person who is receptive is usually able to communicate well because others feel as if he or she has heard them. He or she is interested in them, in their conversation. He or she is quite attentive, responsive, or responsible to the communication which takes place in the group. And finally, the fourth important quality, which is always there in a good communicator, is patience. Good communicators always tend to be patient. They know that they can't always have the floor for themselves and speak their opinions when they want to. No, they also know that sometimes it is necessary to wait until another person is done talking before they change the subject or speak about themselves. Someone who is a good communicator is patient enough to hear another person out, regardless of how long it takes that person to convey his or her opinion or idea. Now, it is very important to remember that there are differences between talking and communicating. When you communicate, you are successful in getting your point across to the person you are talking to. When we talk, we tend to erect barriers that hinder our ability of communication. Now, there are 7 types of barriers to effective communication. First is physical barriers, and they are very easy to understand. For example, doors or windows that are closed and your voice cannot get through. Walls that are erected around, or even the noise pollution in surrounding environment, or even the long distance between people, and all these work against the goal of effective communication. While we agree that we need our own personal areas in the workplace, setting up a very cozy, comfortable and convenient office. To remove physical barriers is the first step towards opening the communication channel in a workplace. Now, this encourages greater openness and frequently creates a closer working bonds. Second important barrier is perceptual barrier, and that are always internal. If you go into a situation thinking that the audience you are addressing is not going to understand or listen to you, or is not interested in what you are talking, in that case, you always try to end up your effort to make your point. In these circumstances, we always employ some language that is very sarcastic, dismissive, or even obtuse, and thus we alienate our conversational partner. Now, the person who always communicates good takes care of these perceptual barriers. Third comes emotional barriers. They are very difficult to overcome, but they are very important to ignore to engage in conversation. We know overcoming of fear is always difficult, but it is necessary. The solution is to have full confidence in what you are saying and your rights in saying it, your qualification in saying it. Sometimes we feel insecure, but by believing in ourselves and what we have to say, we can be able to communicate clearly without becoming overly involved in our emotions. Cultural barriers are very important to understand. They are the result of living in global village, different cultures, whether they might be societal culture or a race or simply the work culture or a company or an organization, can hinder developed communication if two different cultures clash with each other. Now, in work situations, identifying a problem and coming up with a very efficient way to solve the communication problem can quickly topple any cultural or institutional barriers. And there are certain language barriers as well. They are pretty self-inherent. And what I'm trying to communicate here is there are often hidden language barriers we are not always aware of. For example, if we work in an industry or in an organization that is heavy in jargon or some technical language, we should take care to avoid these words when speaking with someone who is outside of that domain, without being so much overemphasizing. We should imagine a situation where we are talking to a child. How can we convey these concepts without relying heavily on jargon? A clear, direct narrative is preferable to an incomprehensible flow of some specialty terms which people do not understand. Then comes gender barriers, but they have become less of an issue in recent years. So let us not talk about it and go directly to interpersonal barriers. Now these are the barriers who finally keep us away from reaching to each other. We cannot open ourselves if we are the victim of this barrier. Oddly enough, this can be often very difficult domain to change. Some people spend their entire lives trying to overcome a poor self-image or even deeply rooted biases about their situation in surrounding. Now they are not able to form genuine opinions about themselves or even the people surrounding them. Now, what is the cure? The cure for this barrier is more communication. Engage with others. Talk to others, and we learn what our actual strengths are or our weaknesses are. We can conclude, communication is not a one-way street. If we want others to listen to us, we must listen to them. And if we overcome whatever the barriers are there in communication, we can ensure that our communication is effective, clear, compact, concise, and very efficient. Now, in this way, we should be confident and we should be very successful in our life with the help of successful communicative abilities.
Thank you very much for the class and watching. I have learned a lot. Did you? Have a good day from the learner.